Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the series Visiting the Apostolic Fathers. We have looked at a number of apostolic figures, going back to Clement, to Ignatius, and we are now looking at another in this session. And this session will focus on the Apostolic Father, Papias. Before we launch into who Papias is and what his contribution was, it's important that we frame again when these writings and figures wrote. The period we're looking at is 95 AD to 150 AD, and the reason that the Apostolic Fathers spoke or wrote to the church was to exhort and edify the church. These two pillars of purpose frame all Apostolic Fathers' writings. And it's important, therefore, as we hear their words, that we see the church as a focal point of their contribution. Now, Papias is an individual who is striking in many regards. He was the bishop of Hierapolis, which is an ancient city, and he lived between 60 and 130 AD. His contribution is tied to some other church fathers, notably Polycarp and even John himself, or one may argue. He was a hearer of John and a companion of Polycarp, and this we read in Irenaeus' contribution in Against Heresies, section 5. We also know that Papias had an interpretation of the sayings of the Lord, which is now lost. So we can infer from some of his writings that there was a document called Interpretations of the Sayings of the Lord, which no longer is in circulation. Lastly, he presented in negative light by Eusebius. So Eusebius does not celebrate Papias, so to speak, but rather he paints him in some negative light. So when we do read Eusebius, especially sections 3 of his history of ecclesiastical history, we can hear some of that coming through. Now, Papias is important in the early church community because he establishes historical connection between Mark and Peter. So Mark, who gives us the gospel, and Peter the apostle are connected to this figure. His knowledge of John and Matthew, the Gospels, that is, also comes through, and it's important, therefore, in our reading of the Gospels to hear how Papias himself interacts with them. He influences a figure called Irenaeus, who is a key figure in later years, and he is the one who shapes his theology and creates another point of continuity in early church tradition. And he demonstrates early doctrinal divergences. So while Papias is an important figure, not everything that Papias says is consistent across the board with what other early figures contributed. So it's important to have these themes in mind even as we work with Papias's contribution. Now, Papias is so important to us that he is one that we will look at in the next session. We will look at what are called fragments of Papias. But for now, this is just an appetizer to look at Papias and how he is important to early church tradition. God bless.